ahead. So the title of the presentation is called Spoilt for Choice, and I'm putting the "for" in brackets. It's all from an East African perspective. And I really hope that by the end of this conversation, I'm able to show you guys, I'm able to remove the word "for" quite definitively from this title, that Spoilt for Choice becomes Spoiled Choice. I think obviously a lot of us know fashion is a lot about choice. It's about luxury. It's about choosing to elevate yourself into a particular space or to identify with a subculture. And looking at it from the East African perspective, it also looks like that. But when I started again working on this podcast and looking more deeply into the factors that were shaping our shopping experience, I realized that the container of choices that we've been given is actually really small and really shitty compared to what we should actually be receiving. So I started getting into all of this because I am a filmmaker, and I had studied film in Toronto. I was also born there. And after a while, I decided to move back to Uganda. I was absolutely sick of being really cold and really jealous of African filmmakers. And so I returned and I linked up with this friend of mine, the other person in the picture next to me, which, by the way, I'll never wear nails as long as that again. It was hideous and horrendous. But his name is Bobby. And Bobby is such a wonderful human being, but more importantly to this conversation, a really fantastic designer. And he was, I guess, without talking too much about the documentary that we're working on together, he approached me to help him document his experience as a designer in Kampala, which at first I thought would be okay and fairly standard. But the more we started interacting with Bobby, and the more we started interacting with textiles and watching this tension between local materials and imported secondhand clothing, the more we realized that this is it's a story, it's a crisis, and there's a lot that is being pushed under the surface that we take for granted as normalcy. But we, in the process of making the documentary, we're super desperate for funds, and we managed to raise some money for our research process, which helped us to make a podcast. So I'll just play the intro of the podcast for you now because it explains things much better than I ever will.
I have big dreams.
I'm Bobby Kolade.
And I'm Nikissi Serumaga.
Nikissi is a filmmaker.
And Bobby's a fashion designer. We're both part of a generation of young Ugandans taking a critical look at our country. We have arrived.
Clothing says a lot about who you are. Imagine what it can say about a nation. This is a podcast about our textile industry and the impact of secondhand clothes on it.
Is secondhand clothing the aid it promised to be? Or is it a new frontier of colonialism and control in Africa?
This is Vintage or Violence, brought to you by the resource of Open Minds, Hivos East Africa, and Rosemary and Ginger Productions.
Cool. So that's the 1-minute intro to our podcast, which, especially because my social media person is on the line, I will not forget to say that we were in Dazed Magazine, Vogue Conference, Vogue Magazine, Fashion Revolution stuff last year. So please do check us out if you haven't already. But that was such an interesting exploration of our textile scene. And it led me into a world which I had on the very surface level just seen as a world full of choices. The reason why I saw secondhand clothing shopping in Kampala as a world full of choices is in part because of my experience living in the global north. When I lived in Toronto and was at university, with whatever small money I could gather, it was either a quick trip to H&M and Forever 21, where you have the same item on repeat over and over and over in different sizes. It's quite easy to bump into someone wearing the same item as you, which is, a big no-no if you want to follow those rules. Or it's going for thrifting if you want to diversify your options and open it up. Myself and my best friend Charisse would do this thing called Goodwill hunting, where we'd scout out all the Goodwill centers in wealthy parts of Toronto to be able to try and get the best clothing. And I thought that was the world and the biggest thing. When I came to Kampala and I went to the market for the first time, my mind was absolutely blown. It is a totally different experience. As you can see in the picture on the right, it's not just about clothes being on display, but clothes that are so many and so voluminous that they're literally filling every square inch of eyesight that you can see. There is no space for ads. There is barely any space for walking. This is really a visceral experience. The choice that I had become accustomed to was magnified time 10,000 here, and I thought that this was a thrifter's dream. When I started doing the podcast, I then realized that there was a much larger chokehold at play. This chokehold starts to flip choice on its head. When I'm looking at the different items on the different walls and the different markets you can go to in Kampala, I should have seen the first red flag, which is there's so much consumption of waste, but I didn't. And so I want to bring you a little bit into the world of Kampala that I explored, and again, these factors that make it be this way. So the first things first is the overwhelm. I have never, ever, ever been able to actually describe it to another human being. So here's like a 1-minute clip of what it feels like to walk through a Wiener market. So what you saw there was Bobby walking through a Wiener market, which is the largest secondhand clothing market in Uganda. It's one of the central points where all the clothes are converged and then dispersed all over the country. It's over 8 football fields in size. When I go there, I put on my dirtiest shoes because I know they're going to get muddy. I dress down. I put all the money I have in 5 different pockets on my body because there's pickpockets everywhere. And I shove my way through literally thousands of people and thousands of bodies trying to access this choice. It is a weird thing, though, to think about a country that doesn't really produce clothes. How do all of these clothes actually get here? All the clothes that we're seeing lining the walls, literally on the floor, were not generated in Uganda. They're not clothes that are secondhand used by people in Uganda. So this question starts to bear more and more weight. Me moving between the 2 different worlds of Toronto and Kampala started to give me an inclination when I began to see tags from Goodwill and Soviet Union and these Soviet Union Salvation Army on these clothes. So I want to give you a short audio clip because Bobby actually had the really fantastic experience of going to a sorting factory in Germany. This sorting factory essentially collects donated clothing, which is how the Salvation Army tags end up on these clothes, and brings them over here. I'll play this clip for you now. And also, can you just let me know, has the volume been okay so far on the played clips? Yeah, okay.
People in the global north think that they're doing good by donating clothes that they don't want to wear anymore to these charities. And these charities are not actually charities.
Donating your old clothes to charity might make you feel better than putting them in the trash, but the reality is nobody needs your old college.
Sorting Centre processes over 1,000 tons of used clothing per month, going through a 2-stage sorting system.
A lot of us think that when we donate our clothes to charity, they're actually going to someone in need. But it's more likely that your clothes are going to end up in the garbage. Every year, more than
I'm going to start by talking about my personal experience with secondhand clothes in Berlin. We find clothes we don't want to have anymore. We collect them in a bag and we walk down the road and throw them into a collection container. They're collected by charities and they're sent to Africa as a donation to help us wash our guilty conscience and to purchase more clothes. I did it myself. It felt great, you know.
You did a really great article for a magazine a few years ago, going to a shipping, sorting warehouse for secondhand clothes. Tell me, what did you see?
Yeah, that was in Berlin. We actually did a shoot there because I think these images are quite important to share with people, because even for myself, it was the first time that I had a full picture of the magnitude of the trade, because these warehouses are massive. That was the first time I got an idea of how it's an industry. The sorting center is actually very depressing. So it's mostly women who work there, not very highly skilled labor, and they open bags full of everything, you name it, you know, pillows, bed covers, socks, underwear, all sorts of clothing. It's like a factory. Bales upon bales upon bales and bags of clothes, and they're sorted into different categories, which are then sent to different countries. As we know, Uganda receives the lowest quality. They actually kept the high quality, clean garments and sent them to their shops. So they have shops all around the country in Germany, and they sell them, and that's where it's vintage.
Okay.
So the vintage is quite European, or German in this case. The violence happens on the continent where we are.
Absolutely.
In Africa.
Absolutely.
So through that experience and through Bobby's story, I started to learn, okay, the clothes that are donated in the global north are definitely the ones that are being sold here in the global south. What I didn't realize at the time was that it was such a huge, massive industry. Secondhand clothing is worth $2.8 billion globally, which in one sense means that the world of the global north, which we often see so separate as the world of the global south, they are inherently linked. We are literally touching each other's possessions. We are financially linked to each other as well. And the clothes that we feel have little to no value at the time of donation actually have immense value. One of the books that I read and reread, because I just thought it brought so much enlightenment, and my favorite quote is Clothing Poverty by Andrew Brooks, where he talks about how charity has become commerce. Secondhand clothing started out, especially in Africa in the 1980s, as an act of charity. There were international organizations, including Oxfam, that were bringing clothes to East Africa and other parts of the continent as charity. As the years have marched on, and also as industry has declined, this charity has turned into a literal booming business instead. And they benefit from the opacity that is created by fast fashion, international import and export, and the distance between the two worlds of the global south and the global north. What I also find interesting about this is that secondhand trade is then clearly a supply chain. This is a slide taken from a lecture done by the Orr Foundation, who are also absolutely fantastic. In it, they say that secondhand clothing is a primary source of clothing for over half of the global population, which is obviously a huge ton of people. It always has been, but that's in a much larger context, I think, also when fast fashion wasn't so much at play. Now that fast fashion has come into the world, it has shifted the dynamics into an incredible imbalance. In Uganda, we are the 10th largest importer of secondhand clothing in the world. And I really find this number incredibly fascinating, because that means that we're competing with countries like India. We have a population of 47 million people, India upwards of 1 billion, and we're both on the top 10 list. How does this happen? 80% of our clothing purchases are also secondhand. So to bring it back to the shopping experience, almost every single item that you see when you're shopping is individual and unique. It is incredibly rare to find 2 or 3 shirts that look the same and are together. But having a deeper understanding of what drives this variety showed me that choice is really looking like an illusion, and that volume is the chokehold. Importing one bale is not such a big deal. Donating one shirt is not such a big deal. But when so many imports are happening, what the danger is that they start clogging our own systems. If this bale full of t-shirts arrives and every t-shirt is $1, how does a local designer, how does a local industry design and create a product that can compete with that price? What is equally unfair is that these international organizations that are driving the stock to Uganda are they're copying the original item for free. They're getting their original stock for free by claiming that it is a donation. This results in a Uganda that doesn't have, or that has a population of people who don't get to choose between the new or the used, the local and the international. We're just flooded by a tsunami of secondhand clothes that keeps on making more and more space for itself because of its high price, overconsumption, and also positioning itself as some sort of disposal system beneficial to the entire world. I really, really, really want to emphasize the volume that I'm talking about. Each bale that we're looking at has about 400 t-shirts in it. 550 bales go into a container. Containers are the method by which they're brought to Uganda, which means that each bale has over 220,000 t-shirts. This is a lot of product to be consuming as a nation. And on a very visceral human level, every day you can go downtown and see people offloading bales from containers, vendors literally physically pushing and shoving each other to try and get the best stock. A mid-sized importer will bring in about 10 containers a year. That is 2 million t-shirts in a year. And some will bring in 10 in a month. How could we ever expect local industry to survive, let alone thrive, under these conditions? It is impossible. It also results in a country that is clothed in someone else's discards.
Donation destination. Now you see these everywhere, clothing and shoe donation bins, but what happens after you drop your old stuff into one of those bins? Where does it go and who benefits from your donation?
Africa specifically is the dumping area for the white to throw the unwanted things. No one wants these old clothes. Everyone wants a new clothes. They do. But can they afford? What I mind about is us producing what we import. Are we producing these things for ourselves? Is what matters. I'm Muhammad Chitezara. I deal in used clothes.
Always forgetting to unmute. So that was a snippet from an interview that we did with Haj Mohammed Chitezara, and he's an importer of secondhand clothes in Kampala. He imports with his brother about 10 containers in a year. And my conversation with him was really interesting because it helped again to reframe this question of choice. Haj is an importer of secondhand clothes who would much prefer to be distributing local clothes because of the situation at hand, beyond even us as consumers who are operating on the 1 to 2 t-shirt level, a pair of jeans, maybe a suit. This man is someone who has the ability to, along with others, shape and affect local industry. And he finds himself in a position where he feels that he cannot do that, where it's not viable to do that. It feels like someone is making the best out of a bad situation. He's doing well, he's got his business, but it's not the actual thing that he wants. And as you can kind of hear in the rest of the podcast, that is a recurring motif. People have found a way to survive, but this is not the thing that they want to do. And my sister, who's also my producer, has a really great saying, oh, at least I made money, at least I have a shirt. And she's like, should we always be living at the level of our least? So I want to also play, if I can see the audio thing, another
So he
clip
has his
from
business here in
Vendes.
Kampala,
Yeah.
and he has his contacts in Dubai
Yes,
or
and
in
UK.
And he tells them, okay, please send a container
Yeah.
of secondhand clothes,
Yeah.
ladies mixed with gentlemen.
Now, I think there is a clear composition of a container.
Oh, really?
Yeah. You don't decide what to buy. No, if you're...
Sorry, I made a mistake, but I also want to introduce this slide a bit better, actually. So we've just come off thinking about choice from the perspective of a vendor who is moving quite a lot of product. What was also interesting was seeing the lack of choice in terms of exactly which product this vendor is able to bring in. It's opaque to him, he doesn't know. So in this particular clip, Bobby is interviewing Haj, who we saw in the previous video, and they're having a discussion about the process, really, of bringing items in and how it works.
So he has his business here in Kampala.
Yeah.
And he has his contacts in Dubai
Yes,
or
and
in
UK.
And he tells them, okay, please send a container
Yeah.
of secondhand clothes,
Yeah.
ladies mixed with gentlemen.
Now, I think there is a clear composition of a container.
Oh, really?
Yeah. You don't decide what to buy. No, if you're buying a container, it comprises of such and such and such and such clothes. So if you see it is business, you order for it. If you think it is going to make losses, you stop it. But the composition, they will give you a packing list.
So you don't even decide what you order.
You can decide, but you cannot decide much.
Okay.
Yeah, you can say, okay, like, I no longer want such and such an item, at least one or two. But you cannot want a complete container with only those things that are a sure deal. Because at the end of the day, who's going to import those fake deals? So they would give you a sure deal mixed with what? Other items that go slowly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because they have to get rid of their stock.
Of course.
Right?
So what was completely fascinating to me about this when Haj shared this information is that he's literally buying blind. Earlier I had mentioned that, the entire global trade kind of benefits from the ignorance of people not understanding what's going on each side of the ocean. But after the conversation with Haj, I realized that not only benefits, it completely relies on the ignorance of people who are buying stock in terms of them not being able to assess every single item that they receive. If you had a small business and you left 50% of the items that you bought up to chance, up to good luck, that would be a horrible business model. But this is the only one that people have access to in the world of secondhand clothing. You're not 100% sure of the quality, the exact number in the bale, the style of what you're purchasing. A lot of the time you open bales, there's cuts, there's stains, there's a lot of damage on the clothes that you receive. So every single buy of a bale is a gamble. And for vendors who are at a slightly lower level than Haj, a few bad buys or even one really bad buy can sink your business. And this is the way that we're running our entire clothing industry. So we're also quite a literal dumping ground. And I think this is one of the points for me that really, really underscores what we're doing and what we're saying. Sorry, I'm just going to come back to this slide here, or to reintroduce this slide. So I think in terms of choicelessness, what is really interesting is that we've seen it on the consumer level, we've seen it on the level of the person who imports and exports the clothing. And there's also a choicelessness on an ecological level. If we go back to the volume of 220 shirts per container, potentially millions of shirts per year, who can actually consume that? Again, we're a population of just 47 million people. Just because often when the clothes are donated, there's this assumption that their end of life has been cared for, has been catered to, where that's actually not the case. What has happened is that the clothes have just left the global north and gone to the global south to again not be disposed of properly here. People give them a second life and extend their life, which is great and wonderful and fantastic. But I think it's also really important to acknowledge that most of the countries where the secondhand clothes are being sent to are countries with really weak infrastructures. We have poor disposal systems, awful sewerage systems. Everybody knows that we're not equipped to handle massive amounts of waste. However, because of the way the global trade is set up, we are made inherently responsible for the end of life of clothes, which we are not equipped to handle, which results in images like this. The image on the right is again borrowed from the OR Foundation. The OR is present. Please follow them. They're fantastic if you haven't already. They've been doing so much wonderful research in Kantomacho market in Accra, Ghana. And Ghana is particularly specific because they're right next to the ocean. And this is an image of their shoreline. The image on the left was when I was going to the store in the evening just to pick something up for the house, and I stepped on a bra, and I was like, "Wow, things are so voluminous that we literally have clothing melding into our streets. This rubbish is so pervasive and invasive, and it's bizarre." And I think that this rhetoric of we are all one does have a lot of value when you look at it from this angle. This thing doesn't just disappear because it left your side of the world. So why are we made responsible for it? What is also incredibly vital in looking at that and looking at the whole situation, I mean, I painted a pretty dire picture. We've got bras in streets, way too many t-shirts, a whole bunch of things are just going wrong. And I think that it's really important to look at that in context of history. I'm not as I said earlier, I'm really not like in the fashion world. I'm a filmmaker, I'm a storyteller. And so when I started exploring this film, I felt it was really important to give context to how did we arrive here, not just we are here. And when I started researching that context, I realized that the Uganda that I'm experiencing now is vastly different to the Uganda that was experienced by my mother. Quite specifically, I told her that Bobby is interested in working with Ugandan cotton. This is really interesting and forward thinking. And she's like, "What are you talking about? Just because there's secondhand clothing shutting down the world of cotton now doesn't mean it was always like that. When she was a kid going to school, she used to have towels made from Ugandan cotton. Her school uniform was made from Ugandan cotton. Her bed sheets were made from Ugandan cotton. And in general, the Uganda she was living in was quite different, which I'll get into in a bit." In the process of recording the podcast, I wanted to explore that notion more. So we spoke to a lady called Maureen Wavamuno, who is an absolute star. I love this woman. She's Uganda's most prominent businesswoman who's been at it for 40 years. And she tells the story of when she tried to start a textile firm in the 60s, 70s.
It was a pleasant time.
Sorry, I'll just take it back.
It was a pleasant time. One of my happiest days of my life. I had a dream that I would be in the #1 fashion house in Kampala. So we started tailoring. We did that mass production that I was dreaming about. We had, of course, difficult times. There was a time of looting. I lost everything. And of course, in between came the second-hand clothes. So our business, the tailor's business, everything was lost. And so was mine.
I did want to contextualize also, you see our logo at the end of every video. I'm really not trying to plug the podcast that hard. These are 6 videos that were released to complement each episode as it came out. So you will see our logo. But to bring it back to Maureen's story, far more interesting, and also my mother's memories of Kampala and Uganda, it then made me realize that Uganda was a major cotton source and still has the potential to be so. To be more precise, in the 1930s, we were the largest exporter of cotton in sub-Saharan Africa. We were exporting globally. We were exporting a lot to Britain, to the UK. Later in the 60s, we consumed 85% of our own cotton. That means that we would clothe, but also employ and grow a stable economy for the people in our country. Further to this point, we spoke to a professor, Professor Wanyama, who has personal lived experience of the devolution of Uganda, and also really great insights on why the cotton sector is so important for any country, and therefore the danger that secondhand clothing poses on a more immediate level as well. A very convenient time for my computer to freeze.
The cotton industry is the largest value chain in the country, and they can produce thousands of jobs along that value chain. These second-hand clothes used to be donations. It's now a business. If you don't ban used second clothing, then the local industry will not develop. Many African economies have collapsed because of used clothes. It's the sad history.
So these are pictures of the actual school uniforms that my mom, aunt, and uncle used to wear to school in the 60s, 70s, which is absolutely fantastic. And kudos to my grandmother for keeping them for so long. And when my grandmother actually did show me these items, it really made me think a lot more about dignity and identity and the less tangible reasons as to why what we wear matters. On a very practical level, of course, hundreds of thousands of school children buying and consuming cotton allows for an industry to grow and allows for an economy to grow around that and for households to grow around that. But also to know on some level as members of, a shared identity and a nation, not to be in someone else's clothes, but to actually say that this is cotton from cotton fields less than 6 hours away from the capital city, that has to impart some sort of pride and some sort of identity building. I can only imagine, or at the very least romanticize.
When I first met you, we're following our friend who's a fashion designer.
Oh, sorry. I forgot that there's an audio clip on this slide as well. And it's Wanyama just kind of elaborating on these points as well.
When I first met you, we're following our friend who's a fashion designer. And then the more we started filming with our friend, Bobby, the more we realized, oh my gosh, actually cotton is such an important crop. It has changed Uganda. When cotton is booming, Uganda also seems to be booming.
We had very many factories which were using cotton as the raw material. So that's how it played and continues to play a very big role in the economy of this country and indeed where cotton is grown. Because cotton is the only natural fiber. Most of the products that we are making here, we are cotton products and the bed sheets and school uniforms. You can imagine all the schools in the country were using cotton products, fabrics, from all these companies. We were about to more than 10 companies in this country at that time, which were making fabrics and garments for Ugandans. So unfortunately, because of the history that we had, when that collapsed, it means many thousands of households collapsed, found no ready income and livelihood. The livelihood was affected. Because when you are, for example, when the companies are working, you are employing close to 3,000, 4,000 people, and those are many households across the country which are really participating in this economy. Well, right from cotton up to the final product. That's why cotton is a very, very important crop. And I think if the country, our country, Uganda, can be able to realize that we need to put a lot of emphasis and support the growth of cotton.
I want to do just a quick time check. This call ends at 6 o'clock.
It ends 5:30 UK time.
5:30 UK.
Yeah.
Okay, on the half hour. Okay,
yeah,
that's cool.
Right. If you've got a bit more, yeah.
Thank you. Cool. So right now, the devolution or the devolution that has happened in that regard in Kampala, in Uganda, is that we have only 2 textile mills that remain. Many of the ginneries and processing plants for cotton have been abandoned or totally shut down. And the few that do operate are operating at severely reduced capacity. And in many cases, we're really talking about less than 50%, which is awful. So this real shit show, for lack of a better word, our government actually tried to do something about it, which was really interesting and really unusual and a welcome surprise. But it was incredibly divisive and kicked up a lot of dust, which was also very exciting because it really showed where everybody stood and started to expose some of the dynamics and the players at play a little bit more. So what the government decided to do, the Ugandan government, was together with the rest of the East African community, which includes Rwanda, Tanzania, Kenya, and Burundi, they all decided that they wanted to ban the importation of secondhand clothes, precisely to keep the things like what Professor Wanyama talks about alive: industry, local production, local consumption. They all came together. There was no initial kickback, except for internally. At this point, a Ugandan wage had become so low that the thought of having to buy only new clothes is a financial nightmare for so many of the population. The purchasing power that the average Ugandan has is too low to be able to accommodate the purchase of what new clothes actually cost. So there was a lot of local kickback for Ugandans who felt that this could be devastating, which was in direct contrast to Ugandan designers, manufacturers, textile firms who felt that this was exactly the break that they needed. The influx of secondhand clothing was too strong for them to compete against in any way, shape, or form. As we were busy squabbling in our own corners, then something quite spectacular happened. The US government, who has very strong and special trade agreements with East Africa, decided to go against the ban that East African countries were making. Before I get too deep into that, I wanna just play a video for you so you can kind of get a picture of what was going on the ground.
If you say you want to ban used clothes, it's disturbing because there's literally no alternative.
Rwanda, South Sudan, Tanzania, and Uganda could all ban second-hand clothes
Uganda is
and leather.
attempting to breathe life into it.
So many people survive on second-hand clothes. 40,000 people come here 24/7, 365 days a year.
These second-hand clothes are killing
the
domestic market. Clothes that are coming from abroad are so cheap, you cannot compete with them on the market.
Because if you can buy a pair of shoes at 5,000 shillings,
which is $1.
At a time when they say second-hand clothes has to close off, this is how much devastation would have happened. We don't know what the fate of the second-hand cloth is gonna be.
So that was a representation of some of the very different local viewpoints that were going on. And as I said, while that debate was happening, the US decided to intervene. Essentially, the US government, on first learning about this idea for the ban, had no opposition for it until they were lobbied by a group for textile firms, or I don't know if you can call them textile firms, but anyway, by a representative for exporters of secondhand textiles in the US called SMART. Wow, that's a mouthful. There's a group of people in the US called SMART, and they export secondhand clothes. When they heard about the ban, they got incredibly upset, wrote letters and lobbied their own government to be able to sever trade ties with Uganda and other East African countries who participated in the ban. This was absolutely crazy. It changed the US government's position immediately, and they threatened sanctions and to hurt really important and essential trade agreements between Uganda. This immediately made me think on a broader level again about choice. What about this conversation sounds like a free market to any of us? What about this sounds like an abundance of choice? What it actually was a systematic bullying and intentional global, power play on a global level to make us stay the receptors of American discards, even though we clearly expressed that that's not what we want. So again, I really want to bring us back to this question of choice and the many layers on which it's taking place. It's incredibly frustrating because when you deal with it on the consumer level, you have to then deal with it on the vendor level, then you deal with it on the national level. And all of these things are so intertwined in the real immediacy of needing to be clothed and needing to make money. It is an incredibly complicated web that I don't know who's going to start to untangle and how. What that does make me realize, though, is, it just brings into the consciousness that as wonderful and as exciting as these things are, they are ultimately cheap thrills. Like in that video, one of the voices said that a shoe can cost $1, a suit can cost you maybe 15. But the true cost of being able to buy a shirt or a suit or a shoe at that price is incredibly high. From a Ugandan perspective, that cost is vast unemployment, vast vulnerable employment, incredibly weakened economic development, a lack of true economic independence and the ability to express it, a lack of dignity on an individual and on a national level. These are absolutely massive. And if you had to put that on the price tag, you would never, ever buy it. On a global north level, it also has a lot to do about how a choice that you make is manipulated. If you're somebody who's interested in actually making better decisions, no matter which better decision you make, someone, some way, somehow is going to figure out how to monetize that and continue trends of ecological, economic, and social destruction for personal and individual profit. So, spoiled for choice is not real. Every choice has already been spoiled. I don't want to be so nihilistic, but I think that bringing to the fore the container of choices that we really have and what they mean is really important. And for me, on some level, it also became something of an empowering experience because one is operating with just a little bit more consciousness than what they had previously. And you may not be able to break all the cycles and all the chains, but you can definitely nudge and influence a little bit more productively and a little bit more differently. What I also think is really important for me about this conversation, like I said before, I really don't come from textiles. I really admire the work of so many people in fashion activism. I'm not a fashion activist though. And what I've come to love about telling this story about clothes is that it's really clothing is such a beautiful tool to uncover broader economic dynamics that are taking place and shaping the future of myself and my peers. That also means that there are so many other industries and spaces in which these trends are taking place. If we take a moment to just remove ourselves, a little bit from the word fashion, we're finding so many of these dynamics in technological equipment, cell phones, laptops, fridges happening in Uganda, things as simple as a bicycle, the way that we process food, seeds, all these different kinds of things. It's the same dynamics, it's the same push expressing itself through different materials. And I think that's a really interesting and important thing to think of. But what I love so much about clothing is that it always goes a step further and reaches into questions of self-expression, dignity, and identity. So what does it say about the global North if they're so quick to consume and discard? And what does it say about us if discards is all that we have left to consume? And I play a short 1-minute sequence from some people who we chatted with on the streets while we were filming the podcast, just to, think about clothing and identity a little bit.
What are you wearing right now? Can you paint a picture of it for us?
I'm putting on a jumper, black
t-shirt,
blue jeans, then a blue check.
Striped shirt?
Yeah, with white stripes.
What is your style? Tell me about who you are.
Right now I'm wearing second hand because I'm just going to town. It's a casual day.
I love black. So I was coming out of the house, but I thought to say, let me try a jacket. Yeah. And since the morning is so shiny, I tried my sunglasses.
I wear clothes according to my age bracket. I look for somehow tight trousers, tight shirts like this one.
The colors are comfortable according to my skin color. They are dark, so I feel great when I'm wearing it dark colors.
I'm putting on a shirt with a Chinese label, but I also don't know its meaning.
So just to wrap it up a bit and to also take us out of this doomsday feeling that I might have generated is, I'm going to read this morning and say, there's no going back. And for real, there is no going back. Things have been so destroyed. And I think an acceptance of that sooner rather than later is possibly one of the most important things we can do. The individual consumer also, just to go back to acceptance a little bit. I think what the really beautiful thing about looking at all these facts and all this information has really done is, again, just to accept and to analyze and to make plans on how to move on. And also to really think about where you're allocating blame. The individual consumer cannot at all be expected to look at a shirt in a shop and know or calculate all of this. Let's always remember that this information is being concealed very often purposefully, but the cumulative effect of it is always disastrous. The same applies to the Ugandan who's going for the option that is most financially accessible to them, and the impact of our consumption habits still remains. What is interesting is that there has been a really reinforced connection between the global North and the global South that didn't exist 20, 30, 100 years ago. What are ways in which we can, maximize on that? And how do we move forward with the scars? And I really think also, again, to put it back into history, it doesn't always have to be this way, because it wasn't. When you think about these things, when it feels super doomsday-esque, it feels as if this thing is inevitable. It's not. 100 years ago, clothes were not even sold in sizes. You didn't have such regulated measurements and ways of selling them. So why do we feel that it has to be that way? these were some of the books and resources and people that I found were super illuminating on my journey. The Ore Foundation are absolute gems, again, based in Ghana, Accra, doing really fantastic community-centered work, really also looking at things from an ecological point of view, land, dumping point of view as well. And really just how do we make things better for the people of Kantomanto Market, who are some of the best upcyclers and strongest components of a circular economy that people claim exists. Andrew Brooks's Clothing Poverty just changed my mind. It opened everything, right? It just broke everything wide open, allowed me to understand the global dynamics that are at play. Conscious Life and Style is really great for bringing this back to how do we think about it in terms of how can I live this out in my daily life? And what are the current conversations that are going on right now that I can contribute to, learn from, or be a part of? As mentioned, Bobby is a fashion designer, and he has got a really fantastic brand coming out next week, Wednesday, T-7 days. It's called Buziga Hill. I really look at this brand as a love letter to Kampala in many different ways. And it's a questioning of import and export trades happening around the world. I'm actually going to do something that was a little unplanned for. Michelle, if you're still on the line, do you mind just speaking a little bit about it? I don't want to give away any spoilers by accident.
Yes, I can. Hi, everybody.
Thank you.
So yeah, Buziga Hill is an ongoing project that's been happening for a while, and Nikissi's been documenting. And the launch is coming up on the 27th of this month. And basically, we've seen Bobby through basically upcycle clothes that are being brought from the global north down to the south, and basically rework them. And the plan is to sell them now back to the global north. And to everyone, people in the south, everyone can generally purchase these items from the website. But yeah, that's also as much as I can say. But it's a really great collection. The pieces are really thought out, all independently designed by Bobby and produced by his team. So I would definitely say everyone should look out for Buziga Hill and the launch coming up on the 27th.
Absolutely. And I think to go back to this question of choice and variety, every single item is unique. There is no repetition. There is no part two. You get one and that's it. And a reminder, that's the 27th. And then the last thing I'll say is, if you enjoyed the snippets of sounds, if you like the videos, check us out on Secondhand Violence on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. It's a podcast project, but it's also a multimedia project with visual art, video, collage, a whole bunch of different things going on. But thank you so much for your time and for your ears. And obviously questions, discussions, comments, smiles are very welcome.